What's up, YouTube? I am the Vanilla Nerd, and in light of May the 4th having happened last week, I want to do a Star Wars movie review. My wife and I just watched Rogue One: A Star Wars Story, so I think that will work perfectly. As always, there will be heavy spoilers for this movie, so be prepared. So, Rogue One: A Star Wars Story is a pretty good film. I actually do enjoy it a lot, but I feel that it is overrated for two reasons. One, because the surrounding movies, the surrounding Star Wars movies specifically, with it were very divisive and very problematic. And Star Wars Rogue One is something that everyone can agree on was really fun and really good, and that they enjoyed. The other reason I think this one gets a little overrated is because the final battle was just so cool. And it really is. It's one of my favorite parts of the movie, and it has a fantastic third act finale. That being said, I don't like the somewhat meh acts 1 and 2 that took us to get to the third act. And so I'm not as enthralled with this movie as other people. Again, I don't hate it. I still really do enjoy this film. I just don't want to sing its praises and think it's the best film ever because it has its flaws, and I want to acknowledge that. Now, I said something just now that's very important, and that is that this movie has 3 acts, and I want to talk about that because it's going to be important to our discussion. Act 1 is everything from the beginning of the movie until Jyn gets the message from her father. Act 2 is immediately follows up after that with the destruction of Jedha City, and then the bombing on Eadu where Jyn sees her father die. And then Act 3 begins with the council deciding not to go on the attack, but then they do go on the attack, and ends with Darth Vader's epic hallway scene, and it's very fun. Now, the reason this is important is because the first 2 acts aren't great. I think the first one's kind of boring. I think the second one's pretty good, but kind of neutral. And I think the third one's fantastic. And so, in reviewing this movie, I just feel like with the third one being fantastic and the other 2 being kind of it's unfair to give this movie such high praise and such love without acknowledging the flaws of those first 2 acts. So, starting as we usually do, let's talk about character. And our main character, Jyn Erso, is really where the heart of my problems with the first act begin. Now, I like Jyn. I really do. But she's just so passive in the first act of this film. We meet her adult version, her adult self, in a prison, and we have no reason why she's in that prison. We have no motivation for her to be there or what she's trying to do, whether she's trying to get out, find information, do anything. She's just there. Then the rebellion capture her, and she lets herself get captured, lets herself be taken to rebel headquarters, lets the rebellion send her on a mission. She doesn't really care whether she's on the mission or not. We don't see her visibly want her freedom or not. It's just she's there. And really, it's not until the end of the first act that she really starts to make decisions. Once she sees that message from her father, that's when she's like, let's go save my father. Let's go figure out the Death Star plans. And then, even after her father is dead, she still has a conviction to move forward to try and get the Death Star plans. And I like that. I love that about her. But in that first act, when she's supposed to be the protagonist, the person who moves the plot along, she doesn't do a lot of moving the plot along. And that's why I have a problem with her character. Again, I like her, but I don't love her. Now, to be fair to the movie, I do acknowledge that characters like this do exist. And I think they work great as side characters, as someone for the main character to bolster up. You know, that uncaring, person who has a heart of gold is a great trope and a great character to use. Heck, that's Han Solo in the very first film. But the problem I see is that this is supposed to be our protagonist. Han Solo wasn't the protagonist of Episode 4 for a reason. He's a cool character, but he wasn't the protagonist for a reason. And even he had motivations, had money, had a bounty on his head that he was trying to overcome. Jyn didn't really have much. Moving on, let's talk about our breakout character, Cassian Andor. I love this character. He has the best character arc out of any of them, and I think he's just so cool. What I love about him is even though he's not a Jedi, he goes on a Jedi's journey. At the start of the movie, he's feeding into the dark side. He has to kill that rebel informant so that the Empire doesn't find out what the rebels know. He has to do that to get away and escape cleanly. It's terrible. It's a horrible decision, but he has to do it. And it's a fantastic introduction of this character to show that he means business and he's not afraid to do some sketchy things to protect the rebellion. And that is fantastic. But then, throughout the course of the film, we see him choose to go towards the light side, choose to disobey orders, choose not to kill Galen Erso, and it's fantastic. And at the end, when he gathers up his buddies and he says, yeah, we've all done horrible things for the Empire, we know that because we've seen that on screen, and that motivation is just so much stronger for us, and I love it. On top of all that, I love his line near the beginning of Act 3 of the movie when they're about to start the attack. And he tells his troops, he's like, make 10 men feel like 100. It's fantastic. It's inspiring. I love Cassian. He's such a cool character, and he did such a good job. Next, I want to go through the rest of the Rogue One crew, if you will, pretty quickly, starting with the guy that's not actually in this image, K2SO. So, with K2SO, it's not like he went on any dynamic arc or anything. I just really like him as a character. He's a fun side character, and he works great. His humor is fantastic. I love the dry sarcasm. It's all I could ever want from a droid. It's hilarious, and it works so well. And his death scene is rather emotional. I love how he's like, the rebellion can still work. You can get the plans. You have to climb the tower, climb, and then he dies. It's so good, so emotional, and gets me every time. So, yeah, I wish people would let Alan Tudyk use his real voice more rather than just him doing animal sounds. Next, let's talk about Chirrut Imwe, and that's the name of this guy, just so you know. So, he's got that cool blind monk thing going for him, and he beats up a bunch of stormtroopers, and it's awesome. I love that scene. Unfortunately, he doesn't get another epic scene like that again. Yeah, the end, his walk of faith is pretty good, but I don't think it's as fun or epic as when he beats up all the stormtroopers to save Jyn and Cassian. But, so be it. What I love about this character is that he clearly has a connection to the Force, but he's not a full-on Jedi. I see Jedi kind of on a spectrum of how powerful they are, and the more powerful are like Anakin or Obi-Wan, and he'd probably be a really weak Jedi Knight if ever he was a Jedi Knight, but he's a really strong martial combatant because he does use the Force, and it does help him in battle, and it's fantastic. So I love Chirrut. I think he's really cool, and I'm glad that we got him. Next is Baze Malbus, and I like him. I like how he has fallen from his way in believing in the Jedi. I like his blaster and just how powerful it is. It's super fun. And the cool chain that goes back to his backpack, presumably full of ammo. Really awesome, or I guess since it's blasters, maybe energy packs. Who knows? So I think he's just a really cool guy. He looks cool. He shoots cool. He's cool. Oh, and the fact that he gets to use a rocket launcher and a machine gun in this movie is just awesome. He fulfills every single Battlefront dream I have. Lastly, we have Bodhi, and he didn't make much of an impact on me. He was there. He was fine. I like the actor. He did a good job, but I just didn't really care. I don't know. He didn't do much. So, where does that leave us? Well, Jyn's a little too passive of a character for my tastes. Cassian has a fantastic character arc, but it's not so fantastic as to make up for Jyn's lackluster character arc. And the rest of the heroes each have their own little trope or thing attached to them, which is great, and it makes me like them, but it doesn't make me fall in love with them, you know? They're good characters, but they aren't great characters. And that's okay. They don't need to be. The plot more than makes up for it. I really enjoy the plot of this film, which we'll get to here in a second, but ultimately the characters just fall a little flat for me. But before we talk about the plot, let's talk about our main villain, Director Krennic. And I love this character. I think his idea is phenomenal and fantastic. While Grand Moff Tarkin was dealing with a lot more administrative stuff and dealing with many more projects, Director Krennic was solely focused on the Death Star, and he was the one that kind of spearheaded the technology, who found the engineers, who got it working and made sure it became a reality, and that was really cool to see. I also love his outright personality of just being a little too ambitious for his own good, getting in trouble with his superiors. It's great. And then seeing him kind of fumble and fuss around the entire film trying to clean up the leak that is Galen Erso, it was phenomenal. When he is destroyed by his own weapon, great classic villain comeuppance. And when he just looks at the explosion caused by the Death Star on Jedha and he remarks to himself, "Oh, it's beautiful." It's just that perfectly sadistic evil villain. He's everything I could want from a Star Wars villain, and I like that about him a lot. And so he works great. I think he's a great character, and I'm really glad he's in this movie. Now, let's finally talk about the plot. And I think the plot of this movie is fantastic. I think it really makes up for the lackluster characters that we get. Now, my thoughts still stand that I think this movie is a little overrated, and I think the first act is off to a rough start. It kind of stutters a bit and has some struggles and issues. But I think the movie ends really well and really fantastically in that third act. And by the time the second act comes around, when Jyn accepts that mission from her father to find the weakness in the Death Star plans and to get the Death Star plans, it works really, really well, and I enjoy it quite a lot. And especially the way this movie ends with all of our characters kind of coming together in the same area with the rebellion, bringing their fleet in and having this big, awesome battle. I really enjoy it. And the way this movie finally ends with Darth Vader chasing after the Death Star plans, it is ominous. It is great. It is so good. So I really enjoy this film. I don't think it's the best thing Star Wars has ever done, but I do think it's really good. And one of the reasons this movie is so good is because it does a giant space battle different from any other giant space battle in the Star Wars universe. Now, don't get me wrong. I like the "we need to blow up this thing" space battle. It works really well. Episode 4 is phenomenal because of its awesome space battle at the end. Episode 6 changed that dynamic a little bit with the SHIELD team on the ground and the lightsaber fight happening on the Death Star, but you still had to blow up the Death Star. That was still the main point of that space battle. Episode 1 still had Anakin trying to blow up the main droid flying space station in order to save his friends. Even episodes 7 and 9 have space battles like this. Now, I will say episodes 5 and 8 do have a space chase, but those aren't big epic space battles. Those are between smaller fleets or, one or two ships and stuff. So this movie really changed all of that because suddenly now the space battle was about how do we get the plans? We need to get the plans. We need to get in communication with the people down there. How do we do all of that? And seeing the rebels struggle to get the satellite dish aligned, to get the shield destroyed, to get everything else working, it was great and it was super cool, and I really, really enjoyed seeing that. This space battle had a different goal than blow something up, and that is what made it dynamically and entertainingly better than anything else that came before it. So that's why the space battle was so good for Rogue One. In terms of setting, there wasn't anything too radically different from this movie than any other Star Wars film, and that was intentional. They were trying to make sure that it lined up with the rest of the Star Wars universe, and it worked great. Things I did like that they included, the new locations of Jedha and Scarif and Edu were all very fun planets and very lively things to introduce to the Star Wars universe, so that worked great. I also really enjoyed the less powerful Force users that we saw in Chirrut and Baze. They were both Force sensitive but not very powerful, and that was a really good way to have the Force be important to this story without having Jedi, and I think that worked great. So those are my thoughts on Rogue One, A Star Wars Story. It's a good movie. I don't think it's great, but it is fun, and I do really enjoy watching it every time I do. So, there.